up at any point.
Well, here we are.
Right.
So welcome. I'm Chris Moyer. This is the Massage Therapy Journal Club. I'm joined today by Tania Velásquez in New York City. Good afternoon, Tania.
Good afternoon, Dr. Moyer.
Thanks for joining us. Call me Chris, please.
Chris, okay, all right.
Tania is the founder of Pinpoint Bodywork. She is on the faculty at the Pacific College of Oriental Medicine in New York City. And she also has some projects called Open Bodywork, which is her private practice, and Massage Therapy Bug, which you just told me what it was and now I forgot.
It's okay.
Remind me.
All right, so we'll flip it. Open Bodywork is a system of bodywork adapted from Diane Jacobs' DNM. So it's founded on her framework and just kind of a little bit more stretchy as far as positioning goes of clients. And Massage Therapy Bug is my private practice because my actual name is highly misspellable. So Massage Therapy Bug is pretty easy for people to find and remember. So that's Open Bodywork is I'll do the scare quotes. I hate the word modality. And Massage Therapy Bug is my private practice. But thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for correcting me for getting those turned around. So Tania chose an article for us to look at today entitled, before I do, I always forget to mention this. There is a link in the description of the video by which you can go to my Patreon site. And I'm not looking to get rich from this project, but I am looking to make it sustainable such that it brings in a couple bucks such that I can get a better webcam, a better microphone, keep the internet on, that sort of thing. So if you find this kind of thing informative, entertaining, either of those, both of those, consider supporting it through that Patreon site. And at the Patreon site, this beast of a study that Tania chose for us, entitled Affective Touch and Attachment Style Modulate Pain, a Laser-Evoked Potential Study. Tania, how did you find this study? What led you to select this?
I don't know. I'm always goofing around on, going on the rabbit hole of reading, and then one link leads to another. And I was Googling affective touch, and I was like, this looks cool. And of course, I saw the word laser. I'm not kidding. So
naturally.
Laser. So laser drew me in because I was like, what is laser evoked? What does this mean? And yeah, that kind of, and then I glimpsed through it, not realizing it was going to be torturous, but yeah, you were game for it. So I figured, I was reading through it. I was like, I have no idea what this means. So yeah, I wanted to dig into it and thought it would be fun. So that's how I came across it. And I've been really geeking out on understanding affective touch more, as far as the importance of it, and it being a really cool direction for massage therapy to kind of branch out. I mean, I think it's kind of anything. It's the next frontier. And yes, it requires a certain sensitivity and emotional maturity for people who do want to go that route and work with where kind of emotional management via touch can work. And yeah, that's basically how I bumped into it.
Good. Well, you and I are on the same wavelength with regard to that. I mean, I've written a essay entitled Affective Massage Therapy, and last week when I was on this feature with Mark Olson, he and I were talking about our hope that people who are interested in massage therapy research start looking at research more broadly and start realizing that the research that can inform massage therapy doesn't have to be about massage therapy directly. It can be about touch. It can take place in the lab. It can be about the way our close animal relatives groom each other. We can learn from all these things, and we need to start stitching these areas of science together to learn more about massage therapy. And, a lot of what you just said relates to that. So should we jump into this?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right. I'm just gonna put you on the spot right away. I told Tanya a couple minutes ago we were getting prepared. I said I think I want to organize this discussion according to 5 general questions. I'm trying some different things out for the format of this. I'm still trying to figure out how this is going to work best. And rather than making an outline for this article, I did start making an outline for this article, and I abandoned it when the outline started becoming as long as the article. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at 5 questions, time permitting. And the first question is, in this study, what did they do? And I'm just going to put that on you since you picked out this study. What did they do, Tanya?
Okay, so what I gathered from it, okay, well, I'll do the kind of umbrella that I gathered for it is basically, because it talks specifically about attachment styles. So I had to look in and dig in and find out more about what that was in the field of psychology. So I gathered there's different ways that people bond with parents. Basically, how somebody's mommy or daddy issues are going to inform a therapeutic outcome as far as touch is concerned. That was what I gathered in a nutshell. Um, and what they did, what I understood that was done is basically women. It was women that were studied in this. Sorry, I got my notebook. All right, so it was women were the focal point of this in the ages of like the 20 something age range, healthy women, not suffering with any kind of chronic pain or fibromyalgia or anything like that. And what they did was use a laser, a freaking laser beam to kind of simulate noxious input, right? And it was heat, I believe, or a pinprick.
Well, not to simulate it, to do it. So they experimentally induced pain in these people using a laser.
To do it. Freaking laser.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So based on, and then they gave them a question. They started out with a questionnaire, finding out what their attachment style was.
So you're doing fine, but let me ask you, you're doing a great job, and you're giving us detail about what the characteristics of the subjects were and how they induced pain. At a more general level, in a sentence or two, what did they do in this study?
In a sentence, oh, that's a great question. So in a sentence or two, they figured out how somebody's attachment style informs how pain is modulated via touch.
Okay, excellent. Good. That is what they did. So, at the most general level, at the highest level, what they did is they tried to find out how does touch affect pain and how is that effect modified or moderated by the person's attachment style. Okay, so already it's getting a little complicated. And then if we get to a more specific level, we have, so if we start using some more scientific terminology, the way that I organize my notes for this is we've got 3 categories of things that they're concerned with. We have independent variables. That's the fancy way of saying the thing that comes first that we're interested in studying. We've got moderators. Those are things that might come in the middle before the effect that is the outcome. And we've got dependent variables. So these are the actual results. So for independent variables, they varied the velocity of the strokes that they delivered.
Mm-hmm.
So this was very, very carefully controlled and experimental. So when we say strokes, they were using a makeup brush at a prescribed speeds and at different locations on the person's body.
To be precise, a natural hair blush brush number 7 by the Boots Company.
Right. Right. Why? And the reason they give us that much detail is, in theory at least, if you and I wanted to run this same study, we could do it, right? We know what they did so precisely down to the exact model of the makeup brush that they used. Mm-hmm. So it's good to have that piece of information. They also varied the location on which they did this. So depending on in some cases, the person was being brushed on the palm of their hand. And in some cases, the person was being brushed on their forearm. And do you remember why they did those two locations, Tanya?
I don't remember why they did those two locations. And I was wondering, it was like, oh, why would it matter? But it makes sense why they chose the arm, because I guess when somebody's seeking comfort as far as modulating pain in real life, since the dawn of time, it's not like somebody will go and touch their foot to ease that pain. So maybe there's some kind of disposed pathway that where these parts of the body signify comfort, like, okay, it's going to be okay, rather than somebody caressing a face, which is a bit more intimate, or putting a hand on a thigh, which might not convey the same kind of emotion. That make sense? So I'm not sure why they.
Well, it does,
but
it absolutely makes sense, but their reasoning was different. So I agree with you, and I actually think that's a confound in this study. Their reasoning for using those two sites is that the underlying nervous system architecture is different. Okay. And so they were noting that and I hope I don't mix this up now, because this study's got so much going on, I'm very apt to mix this up. They were noting that the one location is rich in A delta fibers, and the other is rich in C pain fibers. And if I remember this right, the palm would have the A delta fibers, and the arm would have the C fibers. I hope I don't have that backwards. And so one of the things they were saying is they wanted to see if these different branches of the nervous system being activated would have differential effects.
Okay.
Make sense?
Makes sense.
And I remember way back when I was teaching Introduction to Psychology, when we were teaching students about sort of very basic things about the nervous system, we had a little mnemonic to help them remember what these two parts of the nervous system did. And people who know more about this might jump all over what I'm about to say. I know it's going to be imprecise, but we used to tell the students that A delta fibers, the letter A comes to a point.
Right.
And this part of the nervous system was better at signaling to you quickly that you'd been maybe cut or stabbed. Okay. Oh, you agree? And then the C fibers, if you think of the C as being kind of blunt, this is something that is better adapted to telling you if you've been, bumped into, which maybe doesn't need to travel as quickly in your nervous system to alert you to the fact that, you've been bumped into. I mean, it might be even more important to know if you're getting cut or burned than getting bumped. So that jives with your knowledge of the nervous system. I didn't get that horribly wrong.
And also the C pain fibers are, from my understanding, are more associated with kind of like that dull throbbing pain.
Yeah. And then they were also noting that because of the rate at which they fire, they might be more responsive to slow touch that matches something about the rate at which they fire than the other branch of the nervous system and the other fibers. Okay. So we had stroke velocity and the location to which the strokes were being applied. Those are the independent variables in this study.
And also, had the stroke velocity, but they were also grading pleasantness, like how the person perceived.
Well, we're going to get to that. So that's a dependent variable.
All right. Okay.
So I want to take care of the independent variables. They come first. And then we've got the dependent variables. So the dependent variables are the outcomes. I skipped right over the moderators. They're going to go in the middle. So for dependent variables, we've got the ratings that the research participants gave to the pleasantness of the strokes, the degree to which they said that these strokes lowered the pain that was induced by this experimental procedure. We'll want to say more about that. And another outcome, which was divided further into 3 outcomes, was electroencephalographic activity as monitored by a brain cap. And they measured what they were calling N1, N2, and P2 effects with electroencephalography. So these are the outcomes that they're measuring. Anything to add to that part?
Not to add, to inquire about is when I was reading over this study, and it's something that I would like to familiarize myself with more, is what are these N1, N2, and P2, right? Yeah, the N1 response versus N2 response versus P2. I was not clear on what that was. So I read over it a few times and I was like, so I put that.
It's a good question. Let's bring that up when we get to the question, what were the findings?
Okay.
So, and then the final part, another thing we want to talk about when we say, what did they do? So we've said what the independent variables are. That's what the experimenters are manipulating. Mm-hmm. We've said what the dependent variables are. Those are the outcomes they're measuring in the end. In this study, there's also some stuff in the middle where they said, let's not only see if the independent variables affect the outcomes, but let's see if something in the middle changes how this works. And in this case, they said, we want to look at attachment. And they look at two types of attachment. They look at attachment anxiety and attachment avoidance. Now, you said that you had to do a little bit of background research to see what they meant by attachment, and you made a half joking but half serious remark that we're talking about issues with your parents. So can you say more specifically what you found?
From what I was looking, there were 4 attachment styles. I guess they only studied 2 of them. It was like the secure attachment style. And this is just me. I know nothing about this, of course, but secure, just what the Google University disclosed, but a secure attachment style, which is basically somebody's grown up, well-rounded, right? Without, which I'm not sure what percentage of the world that is. I was not in that category. Anxious or preoccupied is another one. Then dismissive avoidant and fearful avoidant. I'm guessing fearful avoidant would be that high attachment anxiety, right? Where dismissive avoidant would be high attachment avoidance.
So you've got good background here. Because you're fairly new to it, looking at the terms, you might be assuming that certain terms line up with each other, and then maybe in some ways they don't. So you're doing a fine job. So attachment is a subject in psychology that goes back probably almost 100 years, although I would say that the heyday of the research into this probably is in the 50s. So 2 weeks ago, when Raven-Sara Trevelyan and I talked about Harlow's research with infant monkeys, some of that related to attachment. And attachment in the broadest sense is this notion about how you relate to your fellow human beings and how effectively you're able to use them as a source of comfort and support. So if you and I were in the same physical space right now and something startling happened, as happened at this apartment this morning, the fire alarm went off this morning. We've got a wonky fire alarm here, and we don't have any fires, but the fire alarm goes off. So let's say you and I were having coffee this morning, and the fire alarm went off, and you and I might, because we're scared, we might huddle together or embrace each other. Or a different kind of person, if they're startled, might back away from other people and want to be by themselves as a way of centering themselves, or of not raising their anxiety higher, because they would find that kind of connection anxiety producing rather than anxiety reducing. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense so far?
Absolutely. And that was what I gathered. You just put it into words where I couldn't. Yeah, okay. Good, thank you. Makes sense.
Okay. So that would be attachment in the very most general sense. And then the research starts to get a little more specific than that. So when they do attachment research with little children, there's a protocol known as the strange situation. If anyone wants to look this up, this is research done by Mary Ainsworth, strange situation. You'll find it easily searching with those terms.
We'll look it up later.
And okay. And very briefly, they find that under controlled conditions, toddlers react in one of 4 general ways. actually one of two general ways: secure or insecure attachment. And then insecure attachment can be broken down into numerous ways. But basically, it's, do these kids go to mom and exhibit behavior that suggests they're comfortable with using mom as like a home base and as a way of feeling safe? Or are they conflicted about going to mom? Or it could also be dad, but the original research is with moms. Or are they conflicted or upset about using their mom as a source of comfort and security? Now, in the present research, they were working with adults, and they used a questionnaire that was meant to assess the degree to which these people had attachment anxiety or attachment avoidance. And I actually found these words to be a little bit misleading. Attachment anxiety, I didn't care for that terminology. It seems to be poorly worded, in my opinion. It seems to be the degree to which people effectively would use attachment to gain security, like the degree to which we might huddle together if we needed to feel a little more safe and secure. Whereas attachment avoidance measures a desire to cope by oneself, to be a little bit separated from other people under stress. We might imagine that those people feel increased stress as a result of, being forced to make contact or being put in close proximity to other people. Are you still with me?
I'm still with you. I gotcha.
All right. So they looked at those as moderators of, do the speed and location of this experimental touch, modified potentially by these variables, lead to differences in how people will rate pain reduction and what's happening in their brains. So it's complicated, this study. Would you agree?
It is. Can I add another complicated thing to and I just want to make sure I interpreted the language okay, and what I wish I had more time to do is that the study had, of course, there's a lot of footnotes in it, as many studies have, but also linked to a bunch of other studies that were equally across across the board and all over the place. But I guess one of the questions that this study brought up is how much of that is nature or nurture attachment styles? Because I guess they're finding a opioid as receptor gene. And is it that in animals they're finding that this gene might, which I thought was interesting, might be associated with differences in attachment style. I always considered it to be a nurture issue, but I guess nature might have something to do with it as well.
Well, the short answer would be yes. An interesting thing that is implied in what you're saying is you seem to be implying that if a biological link can be found, it must be nature rather than nurture. But I would say that's not necessarily the case.
Okay.
Depending on how we're nurtured, that would have an effect on what genes are expressed and how they're expressed.
True. The plot thickens.
Yeah, it's complicated.
All right.
All right, so we've got everything that they did except for one other piece, and that is this experimental inducement of pain. Let's say something about that for a minute. And when you do pain research, you've got a problem right away. If you want to do pain research, especially with human beings, what are you going to be allowed to do to people? Right?
Yeah.
We can't
facade here.
we can't stab you. We can't punch you. We can't do anything that's going to traumatize you or that's likely to traumatize you. We can't do anything that's going to cause lasting damage, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things you have to do is you have to come up with a way of inducing pain that's going to be, it has to be painful, but it can't actually damage the person.
Right. And also, go ahead, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
So I mean, is it the fact that somebody knows that they're going into the pain study, so they're expecting a dosage of pain, which is very different than if you're just surprised by it.
Yes. So, yes. So they know that, and they also know, they may still have fear about it, but on some level they know that there's no reason to expect they're going to be actually damaged. Yeah. And that expectation in the real world is part of pain. And so a major challenge in pain research is not only coming up with things that you can ethically do, but then you've also got the problem that those things you can ethically do don't mimic what happens in the real world, or they mimic it, but they don't mimic it entirely.
Right.
So it used to be, pain research used to revolve around something that was called the cold pressor task. And basically, if you put your hand in ice water and you leave it there, it hurts, but it won't damage you unless you're in. Okay, so it used to be pain experiments used this cold pressor task almost exclusively. And nowadays, with advancements in laser technology, they've got specific lasers that and the wavelengths and stuff all figured out that they can use these lasers to give you the sensation of being burned. And technically you're being burned at a low level, but they've got it so that they know they're not doing lasting damage. So that's what they did. So they shot these people with lasers.
They got zapped.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
It's amazing. Crazy. So that's where the lasers come in. So now we pretty well know everything that they're doing.
Question: were these? Did I read this right? Were they transcutaneous? Okay, transcutaneous. Okay, just wanted to. Never mind. Go ahead.
You want to double check where they were getting shot with lasers?
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, we're doing fine. This is good. Okay, so now that we've got sorted, what did they do? They shot these people with lasers, and they altered the rate at which they stroked these people. They altered the location where they stroked these people. They took into account how these people answered a questionnaire describing their style of attachment. And in the end, they measured the pain ratings that these people delivered, along with some of the activity in the person's brain that might tell us something about how they're processing pain. All right, so there we go. So we might go a little over time on this one. That took us almost half an hour to get to that point. So what were the findings now that we know what they did?
So what were the findings? In summary, they said effective touch, this quoted, effective touch on effective touch on subjective and neural responses to pain do depend on individual differences in attachment style. That's what they found. And of course, more research is needed to see if it was, because this was just with a laser, to see if that, and it was soothed by a brush stroke. So we don't know if there would be a greater attenuation if it was a stranger, or let's say in my domain, a massage therapist you just go to, who's still considered a stranger, or if it's like a romantic partner, which is a different kind of layer of touch there. And they indicated more research was needed for that.
So they found that this variable of attachment made a difference.
Yeah, and I think it was people with high attachment predicted higher pain ratings when slow versus, where the variation of slow versus fast brush strokes were used, whereas people with high attachment had lower pain ratings, which I thought was pretty fascinating. If I'm understanding that correctly, that being the case.
I think you're doing really well describing this. I mean, I'm having a little fun at your expense because you picked this study, and so I'm asking you the absolutely.
All right, skewer away.
I am asking you absolutely the hardest questions, and you're doing a good job with them. So, I mean, I would emphasize what you said at first, which is attachment style mattered. The results that these people had, both in terms of self-report and even in some cases what was going on in their brain, was different according to whether they were the type of person who moves toward another person for comfort, or the kind of person who wants some space, stress, or under pain to generate their own feelings of comfort. So we're on the same page with that, at least, right?
Yes.
And after that, and I'm gonna I'm going to answer the question in my own way after that. If a person asked me, I read this study, I would say at least 10 times. If a person said, well, that's nice, Chris, what else did they find? You know, how did all these things go together? My answer would be, I don't know. I found this study to be so incredibly confusing
Yeah.
that I do not know. So not only, I think I'm really glad you said what you said when I asked you that, because that, to my mind, was the most interesting thing, although there are other interesting things in this, that this attachment style moderated how touch affected these people's processing of pain. That's really interesting. And it lines up with things I've been interested in my own former research. But then the complexity of, you know, the stroke speed did or didn't go in this direction, depending on if the person was attachment anxious or attachment avoidant. And then it depended on whether we touched them in this location and whether this kind of nervous system activation happened. And that was seen in the N1 signal, but not in the N2 signal. It just goes on and on and on. And so not only could I not make any clear sense of exactly how these variables went together, despite reading this 10 times, I also, in addition to that, I found myself thinking, you know, there's only 50 subjects in this study. And when you start dividing all these outcomes and moderators up, it's too much in one study, in this scientist's opinion. Now, some other scientists, including ones who are, you know, demonstrably more accomplished than I am. You know, this is a serious study in a serious journal by some serious researchers. You know, they would argue me, and they would probably do a pretty good job of it. But I have never liked seeing this many variables in a single study. I think it's too many. I think this needs to be broken out in 2 or 3 or 4 studies where each thing is studied a little bit more in isolation.
Do you think they went into this study understanding the variables, or is that something that kind of pops in? Like they set up, they're like, oh, let's see what these attachment styles, what influence they're going to have. And all of a sudden, a can of worms opened up.
That's a great question. I will pay these researchers a compliment and respect and say, yes, I have a very good sense that they understand their variables and the theories and the hypotheses that they wish to test. And it is the case that sometimes you read a study and you start to get the sense that they weren't really sure what they were doing going in, and they said, let's throw all this in and see what happens. And then they kind of figure it out. You know, they kind of construct an explanation in. Now, these folks knew what they wanted to study and how to conceptualize it. My issue is with how many different variables they put in just this one study. Is this the midpoint of the program where we are joined by cats?
I think so. I think it's cat time.
I can do that too. Let's see if we can increase ratings through cats, but we won't stop talking about what we're talking about. Great. Here's Tulip.
Got cat candy.
Yeah, we got some of this. This is remarkable that Grace is not showing up. Tulip's not going to let me pick her up, but Grace would let me pick her up. Oh, here comes Grace. Grace.
Oh yeah, my God.
I'll improve the ratings here. Anyway, she'll join me in a minute. So yeah, I feel like there are way too many variables. And also, it's going back to something you were noting when we started talking. There are variables that are on top of variables, to put it in a casual way. So they have, here's Grace, by the way.
Hi, Grace. This is Tito.
Tito. Grace is squirmy. She wants a treat. So, you know, they stroked these 2 different anatomical locations, the palm and the forearm. And the reason for doing that was to access different nervous system fibers.
Right.
However, it can't be as simple as that, because as you pointed out, different anatomical regions have different meanings to an individual. Some are more personal and private. Some might be more intimate. Some might be, more likely to be culturally acceptable to touch, and on and on and on. Now, there might not be a tremendous difference between the palm and the forearm in those respects, but they're still different.
Like what if it was,
And
the shoulder might have a different thing. And
yeah, I mean, logically. So it's, for researchers to say that we are choosing these sites because and only because, that's not the wording they use, but that's implied in an experiment, only because we're going to be getting at different nervous system fibers. That may be largely true, but we can't know that there aren't other factors that are going to confound what they're doing there. We can't know if we see a difference between those two sites that it's all down to that aspect of the nervous system. It might be due to other things too.
yeah, it gets hairy in here. Yeah.
Yeah, this study is so complicated. Okay, so
Speaking of hairy, like that was the difference too. If is it glabrous skin or not glabrous skin? Like it reads different in different areas.
right, right, and they seemed, and I'm not an anatomist, and my knowledge of physiology is, I mean, I have some, but I don't have as much as some other people.
Mhm.
They seem to be saying that that the hairy skin is where you find the um, see, and now I might mix it up, is where you're going to find the C fibers, and the non-hairy skin is where you're going to find the delta fibers. But um, yeah, it got really complicated. Now
Yeah.
now while we're still on the question of what were the findings, there was also the matter of the electroencephalography. And you asked earlier, and I said, we'll get to that. You said, what is this N1, N2, P2 that we're talking about here?
Mhm. Yes, what is this stuff? I do not compute.
So how about, I will answer that question as best I can, but can you tell us anything at all that you do know about electroencephalography? Do you know anything about it?
I know it's used to measure excitation or inhibition of different areas of the brain, uh,
Hmm.
used for study and also diagnostics. And
Yes.
not what I know.
Good. What was the last thing you said?
Like used for diagnostics, pretty much, right?
It can be. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we've got a method here where electrodes are put on the person's scalp, and there might be just a couple, or there might be a lot of them, depending on what they're doing. And these electrodes are able, through the scalp, to measure the electrical activity of clusters of neurons in the brain.
Mhm.
And they're very good at measuring things quickly. They're not great at telling you precisely where you're measuring or how the brain is structured, but they're very good at measuring things to hundredths of a second, maybe thousands of a second nowadays. And in the language of science, these are called potentials. And that comes down to how nerve cells work. Nerve cells are charged up and ready to go in their regular state. And when another nerve cell tells them to fire, they fire that potential. So this word potential comes from, how the nervous system works. And then N and P, this has to do with conventions for whether they're looking at the negative activity of the neurons or the positive activity. Here's a funny thing is in neuroscience, unless they've changed this, negative goes up and positive goes down, the exact opposite of the way a mathematician would do it. That's of no importance. So they're looking at these timings and patterns of how the brain is responding. And taking what they were telling us and really simplifying it a tremendous deal is they were looking for two kinds of activity, one of which would imply a lower level response, sort of before the higher functions of the brain, and then another one that would be at a higher level of the brain, which might suggest more conscious control or conscious response to pain.
Oh, cool. All right. I wasn't all right.
That is going to be the best I'm going to be able to delineate it. The study goes into considerably more detail. So anyone who wants more detail than that should dig into this study. But that's it in the most basic sense. And the N1 activity that they're looking for would be more indicative of a reflexive non-conscious response, something that the person's maybe not going to be as aware of or in control of. And the other ones, the N2 and the P2, are going to be more indicative of a higher level response that the person's going to be more likely to be aware of, or maybe even be able to exert some control over.
Question: are those standard? Is that compartmentalized in a standard way that N1 is usually conscious and N2, P2 are not, or do those establish basics?
I mean, it seems pretty, so my knowledge of this kind of thing, I've done a little bit of electroencephalography research, but these folks do it all the time. So they seem to be saying that these ways that they are dividing this up are well understood and well respected. So I'm going to take their word on that. I'd have to dive into it further to be able to answer that better, but I don't have any reason to doubt that that is a standard accepted way to look at this. And, this illustrates kind of one of the things that I want to do with this feature is I want to get people who are interested in science, but who maybe aren't scientists themselves, to get more comfortable thinking about the different levels at which you can read something. I think one of the things that keeps people from diving into science is they feel that if they don't understand such a thing completely, that they don't understand it. And the fact is that when you've got things like this that are really complicated, you can make a decision about how far and how deep to go with it.
Right.
You can read this quickly and see what you get out of it, and you might get something very simple out of it, like, okay, the way that we process pain is influenced by how we relate to other people. That's true in the most general sense. And if that's all that a person takes away from this, that's a pretty important finding, even if you can't say a lot more about it. Whereas if someone really wanted to know a lot more about this, you might have to read it a lot deeper and a lot more carefully to learn about, okay, what exactly is an N1 versus an N2, and what part of the brain are we talking about? And you can go as far as you want with this sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, it was helpful for me to do my best to kind of rewrite it in my own words.
Yes.
Which I think, thank you for the opportunity to do this, because I think that's a practice I'll keep up with whenever I encounter a paper. It helps put it in.
Well, I mean, thank you for being willing to do this. And, it's really kind of an interesting, it's really just kind of by chance that you chose such a difficult study to read. It's also, I think another thing that makes this study difficult is the writing. Pardon?
It was baptism by fire, right?
Yeah, totally. I find the writing style of this study to be very dense. And I don't mean dense in the way that we use that word to mean stupid. I mean dense in the way that it's like just very hard to penetrate. And there's some things that they do that I find very frustrating where, because the nerve tracts are conflated with the anatomical sites, are conflated with whether the skin is hairy or not. They kind of just alternate between those in different sections of the paper, just like, glabrous skin, and then they talk about CT, right? They're not even consistent, such that when you're reading it, you have to keep thinking about, like, wait, what's what? It's not written in a way that I think fosters understanding. I think it could be more effective in that respect.
Would you have put, this is what we found about the velocity, here's the velocity map. Here's the anatomical location data. Here is the velocity of the strokes, the location of, and whether it's on hairy or non-hairy skin. And here's what we found out. I mean, that have made it, you think?
I mean, the short answer to what you're asking me is I'd have done some things differently, including I wouldn't put this many variables into a single study. Okay, because I think it makes it almost impossible to represent the results graphically, and such that it makes it then impossible to hold the body of results in one's mind.
That's why I'm wondering if they knew that going in, or if it was like they started and they're like, oh, now we've got all this other stuff. we didn't realize we had to contend with. That's why it was.
You know, it could be that these people know this area so well that they're able to hold all these variables in their mind because they're so familiar with them. But for those of us who don't work with all of these things in a laboratory every day, because we don't have as much familiarity with them, it just becomes so much harder to hold all these variables in one's mind at one time. I mean, it could be that. But I'd really like to see, I'd like to see there be fewer variables in the study, and I'd like to see them focus maybe on one thing first, focus on stroke velocity first, get that sorted out, then from there go to anatomical site. And then once you've got those two studies, then maybe they lead logically to a third study. And, you know, it's worth mentioning here that when you're a working scientist, there's a balancing act between simplicity and complexity. There are good reasons to do 3 or 4 or a dozen simple experiments. They make certain things really simple. On the other hand, resources are really, really expensive. And so you want to get as many things done in a single study as you can. You know, because time is valuable, subjects, research participants are valuable, the materials that you're using, the time that you need to reserve for using neuroscience gear is expensive. So there's a balancing act between, you know, complexity and simplicity when you're doing these things. And in my personal opinion, they went a little too far in terms of complexity in a single study.
You're trying to shove too many ingredients in the pot.
Possibly. But I must say, some other scientists might disagree with me. In fact, they might even say, "Well, that's because you're not understanding it." And you know, if you knew this at a better level, you'd see that actually this is exactly how it should be done. We don't have anyone on the call today who's in a position to say that. So I'll sort of say that there probably are. Well, surely the scientists who did this research would say that. I mean, I assume that would be their position.
And also the age range was interesting too. It's like women ages 23 to 24 that were otherwise healthy. I'm wondering, as we get older, what ourselves, people, but I'm wondering, are those attachment styles able to be influenced in any way? Like if they tested them in another 25 years,
Well, I think that's an excellent question, and I don't know how attachment is known to vary across the lifespan. I mean, I could speculate on it, but that's a terrific question to be asking. Yeah, I mean, how would the results be different if they were using people who were significantly older?
I mean, they've gone through different challenges in life, different ways to develop coping mechanisms or
Right.
relationships that might influence how they, I don't know, perceive touch in general. But
Yeah, and then there's even anatomical differences. As we get older, our skin gets kind of thinner, right?
more variables.
Yeah, and they're variables that are conflated with each other. So if you saw a different effect in an older sample of people, you wouldn't know if it was due to their age. You wouldn't know if it was due to the way that their attachment style was different from these younger women. You wouldn't know if it was due to differences in their skin and nervous system. It's likely due to all those. It would get really complicated to try to sort that out. But it would be interesting still.
I mean, when I was like 23 or 24, I had extremely different ways of relating with people. So I imagine universal, I'm guessing. Another question I had was a study like this, I found, like, how would this information, we have ideas of how it might be relevant that I'm still kind of wrestling with putting into words, but how could we use this to inform our work?
Well, let's.
It is helpful, or is there actual ways we can apply touch differently that could alter somebody's experience of pain? I mean, we know that in one sense, but with this kind of detail, what could we do with that?
And I want to hear your opinion on that, but I'd like to hold that for one step further down the line. So I think you and I just implicitly discussed the limitations of this study. I mean, limitation of this study is it's too complicated. But what we haven't done is touched on the strengths. I'd like to say what the strengths of this study are, and then if time, how are you on time? Are you okay on time, or do we need to?
I just have to use the restroom probably in about I do the baby dance, but I can.
Would you prefer to take a quick break? There's no reason we can't do that.
Actually, let's do it now while we're on break and everybody. And I'm quick. I'll be right back.
All right. We'll be back in a couple minutes.
You can look at you can see Bed-Stuy from here. There you go.
Yeah, that's a nice. Yeah, put that up. That's nice.
Bed-Stuy. Be right back.
So this is what they call dead air in the broadcast business. I should probably have something ready to say. I don't, but actually this is an opportunity while we're waiting for Tania to return for me to point out once again that this feature that I am presenting and also that I am working on refining, this Massage Therapy Journal Club, is something that I'm trying to get supported through the website Patreon. And if you look at the description beneath the video, there is a link to my Patreon site. I have several people right now who have made small contributions to this project. And what I'd really like to see is for those small contributions to grow in number. I'd rather have a lot of people making a small contribution. We're getting some pretty bad sound interference. I'm not sure why. But if I could get, if we could get a couple dozen people or more supporting this, I can turn this into a sustainable project that will be refined and that we will have a standardized format for. And I think that would be terrific. So if you find this kind of thing to be of value or of interest to you, consider supporting it in that way, even at the smallest possible level that Patreon provides. Tania, we're getting some pretty bad sound interference. I don't know.
Is it done? Can you?
It seems to be when I speak. I don't know if like your speakers are getting picked up by your microphone. Now it's better. Now
Okay. No, my notebook kind of flopped on, but I wasn't getting the answer. You sounded fine.
Okay, maybe your notebook was acting as a baffle or something. Anyway, we're good now.
It was.
So let's say what we think are the strengths of this study. What do you think?
I think it was a bold and brave thing to tackle. I think the strength was that it raised so many other important questions. And I do like that they were specific as far as age range and group goes. It didn't, it was women between 23 and 24. It's a really tight control group. Sorry, give me a second. I'm thinking I wasn't anticipating this question about the strengths because it was all just like, what am I reading? I think they were honest as far as the data they collected went. It came across as like, hey, we got this, but we're not sure what it could mean. So they weren't hyping it up. There were no definitives there. They were not like, we got this, so this is that. This is the one thing that they found was like, yes, attachment style can influence the ability of touch to modulate somebody's pain, but there's all this other stuff we have to look into too. So I think that was I think those are the strengths of the study.
Good. So to summarize some what you're saying, you're saying that the strengths are that they were very honest and clear in terms of what they were reporting. It's very detailed. Their decision with the subjects to use a very narrow range of subjects means that we have a very precise idea of who they got data from. And there was something else you said that's slipping my mind, but I'll probably reiterate it in some of my own remarks. I agree with the strengths that you highlighted. And I would add to that this study as a laboratory study that's very tightly controlled right? So they controlled who the subjects were within a very tight range. And they did that to control variability because they said men and women are known to have some differences in how they respond to pain. And that's interesting, but we don't want to be concerned with that. So we're going to have this kind of subject, and we're going to have this very precise, controlled way of delivering experimentally induced pain. And we're going to have this very precise way in which we stroke people with this very precise instrumentation. Basically, what I'm getting at is everything in this study is very, very precise. Would you agree? Okay. And that's a strength. And I think a lot of people who are consumers of massage therapy research, they might be quick to see that as a limitation. They might say, look, this is nothing like the real world. We don't deliver massage with cosmetic brushes. We don't always massage women who are between the ages of 23 and 24. We don't always massage people at 3 centimeters per second versus 18 centimeters per second. And they'd be right about all that. But it's important to know that not all kinds of research are attempting or should attempt to recreate real world conditions. This is a really important point that sometimes people miss, that experimental control is valuable in and of itself for determining how something might work. And it's a separate question as to whether what you learn from that applies to the real world. And there are other ways to address that. So I would say that a major strength of this study is what's known as its internal validity, which is a fancy way of saying the precision of its experimental control. All right.
From the little bit I know about studies, that seemed to be like, it's, without quite the tool set to be able to pick it apart, be like, that's wrong, what I gathered from it. It's like, wow, because they're not writing anything in stone except for this one little finding. They're acknowledging they acknowledge their own weaknesses in the study. I think it's like, oh yeah, we found this, but there's also all these other things to consider. And we may have found out that there's also this to consider. Like, this is a brush. This is not a human hand. This is not a stranger versus a lover or a partner or a parent. And those are other things that have to be explored also. So I think they were really forthcoming with that, and that was cool.
Well, I think that leads us to the final broad category broad question we want to ask, which is, can this study inform practice, or does it inform practice at all? And what do you think?
Yes, I think so. I think so. And I say this being very careful and conscious not to scope of massage with that of psychology. We're not psychologists. We're not, that's not our jam, but understanding somebody's kind of come from could also be helpful with understanding what kind of touch we want to deliver. Do we want something that's more stimulating? Do we want something that's just more kind of like just sinking in and being with somebody, rather than kind of, we want to distract the nervous system, or do we want to kind of bond with it? That coming across okay? Like really like, and also if massage, and I not if, I think it's a matter of time. When massage starts being used as an adjunct to work with people, PTSD and maybe some dissociative disorders, I think this is really important stuff to know and be sensitive to, and realize that, yeah, our style of touch can have different effects depending on somebody's mental makeup.
I mean, that all makes sense, everything you're saying. Because I'm not a massage therapist, I'm not going to try to answer this question, or I'm not going to try to answer it to the extent that you're going to be able to answer it. I mean, I have a sense that this study has something to say for practice, in terms of, at the very least, it gives us it suggests that these different rates of being stroked are communicating something different to the person, which makes logical sense. But having shown this experimentally, it gives us more confidence that that's got to be the case. And it also tells us that, you know, the psychological makeup of a person coming in is going to moderate how something like this is received. And I'm speaking in generalities right now. They did something much more specific than that, but we logically can assume that there's probably all kinds of ways in which this is the case. I'd like to ask you a more specific question that builds on the answer you just gave. So in this study, they determined a person's attachment style by giving them a validated questionnaire that one would use in a research study. Now, it's not going to be practical for someone such as yourself to do that in practice.
Never mind. Sorry. Glass broke.
Okay. Oh,
All right.
everything all right?
Okay. No panics.
It's in control. You're not going to make cats running through it or anything?
Disclaimer, I'm not a ballerina, so I'm not, it's okay, they're fine.
But seriously, are we okay to continue, or do you need to attend to that? I don't want any of your pets to...
It was a really clean break. It's fine. Yeah.
Okay, for sure.
All right.
Well, the question I was about to ask you before you start smashing the place up is in a practical, everyday sense, how do you determine something like what these people are measuring? In other words, if you're working with a person, how are you determining whether they're the kind of person who is very comfortable with the idea of receiving a massage versus they're the kind of person who maybe is a little conflicted about it, or, you know, this is very new and they don't know if they're going to like it? Do you understand what I'm asking? Like, what are the ways in which you determine that, since you're not using a psychological questionnaire to do it?
That's a great question, and I can only answer of how I would handle this. I'm a massage therapist, and again, I'm very conscious not to conflate psychology with what we're doing. But in this line of work, it's, and I've waited tables, I think, just in fields where you're coming in contact with people away. And I've been wrong before, but I mean, I've been wrong with what I kind of pick up on people, but you develop a sensitivity to body language. Um, and I mean, one thing, I don't do a health questionnaire, but I do a pretty thorough intake where you kind of get a snapshot of somebody's life, what they do, and this stuff. If they've had a massage before, things like eye contact during communication, body language. Are they kind of like eager? Do they show up like, oh, I can't wait for this, or are they just kind of this? And when you leave them kind of in the room, are they looking around like, what do I do? Or sometimes I have somebody I work with. Usually my clients are not close, but I work with them over the sheet. I've had clients like that have left on shorts, and that gives me an idea of how familiar or comfortable they may or may not be with somebody approaching them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I work with various styles, it's kind of, and part of it is just make it up as I go along. Like, you learn to read subtleties in the skin. Are they kind of, do I do something and there's a slight tension there, or do I do something and is there a sigh in the response, or do they do a little, is there? So there's all these little things that, I mean, I can't say that I can put them in a box and be like, oh, this means that and that means that, because it also depends on the individual that's coming in. I mean, I've had different levels of comfort with different people, massage. Like, some people, it's like, you go ahead and do whatever, and with other people, and nothing to do with them personally. And other times I'm just like, yeah, I just want to relax, or I want to be stretched out. I want some nociception. Other times I need a little love, and that could change from a day-to-day basis. So, and clients, when they come in, they're literally different people from when they have a great day at work and come in after that. That's a different person you're working with than if that same person that just got berated by one of their clients or a boss. These are two extremely different massages for the same person. So I'm not sure if that answers it, but it's the
Well,
best.
you're answering, I mean, your answer is directly on target. I mean, the interesting thing about it is, apart from generalities, you're not able, and I don't mean you specifically, I mean, I'm talking with you, but a person in your position is not able to say, oh, well, the way I do this is by looking at A and looking at B and looking at C. What you're describing is really intuition. You're like, I've done this work, I've worked with a lot of people. Um, I get a sense through their body language. I get a sense through the way they walk in the door. I get a sense through the way they present themselves, where they might be, and what their level of comfort and what the whole thing is. And you and I have been involved in countless online discussions of massage therapy, and people probably get the feeling from myself that I might think that only scientific information is valid, and when people want to talk about, well, using intuition and body work, that maybe someone like me just completely discounts that, and that's not the case. I think you're describing a way in which that it's very hard to test, and as you said, sometimes you get it wrong,
Yeah.
but there almost has to be a learning process, including a non-conscious way in which you're evaluating where people are at and how they work, that maps on to what they did in this study, or to part of what they did in the study. I mean, they made it precisely about attachment, but in the real world, the extent to which you can intuit what a person's mental state is, what their goals are, even if they haven't been able to articulate them, how comfortable or conflicted they are about being touched as a part of massage, all the things you said, you're not going to do those through a dozen questionnaires. You need to be able to do those through your own sensation and experience at what you do.
That's, I try not to let experience get in the way. It's like when I approach, well, sometimes it's like, oh, I've been doing this long, and of course, that's when I feel like I get it wrong the most. It's like,
Uh-huh.
you know, important to me, like, just keep fresh eyes on at all times. Like, oh, yeah,
Interesting.
and I do my best to do that. Like I said, I can't speak for other people, but sometimes those gut impressions, that's the best I have to go on
Mhm.
without making it an unpleasant, dry experience. Like, well, I can't. It doesn't always feel right to ask somebody about their day. If they want to talk
Mhm.
about it, they will. Sometimes you get them going, and stuff, and other times that's not what's called for. And I can't do anything with that information other than continue to offer comfort.
Well,
But
and not to, I'm going to risk sounding really new agey or really flaky here, but in a sense,
oh, I love new aging.
okay, in a sense, you're talking with them about their day without talking. I mean, what you're talking with their body through what you do.
Yeah, yeah. Nonverbal communication. And I think that's what massage is, nonverbal communication. It's a conversation. It's not like
Yeah.
performing a soliloquy or a monologue.
Yeah, conversation is good. It's not like I'm telling you this. There's a back and a forth.
Once upon a time, I used to do that, and I was a younger hothead. Be like, I know that, but as we grow and change, that doesn't work that way.
We should write a paper comparing massage as a lecture versus massage as a conversation.
Yeah,
That could be a good theme for developing an essay.
I'm game. I'm game. Yeah, but I don't know. What would you say is the biggest takeaway of this paper from your super duper smart sciencey brain?
Oh, I'm not. Thank you, but I'm not as smart as you maybe think.
Oh, sure.
I'm not dumb, but I'm no genius. Um, the biggest single takeaway, because this study is so complicated, because I struggled with it so much, my takeaway would be the most general one, and it would be one that happens to align with my own ways of thinking and some of the research questions I asked in the past when I was looking at things like therapeutic bond as they related to massage therapy. People process something like massage. I almost said massage, but this study isn't massage. It's a massage-like intervention.
Touch.
Yeah. Well, being touched with a brush, but
Yeah.
it's getting at touch.
$1 million modality
How,
empire if you play your cards right.
what?
Another $1 million modality empire CEU, massage with brushes, with different makeup brushes.
Yeah, I don't know. But the broadest takeaway is that how people benefit from a touch intervention is mediated by aspects of their own psychology, their character, their personality, if you like. I mean, in the very general sense, this study establishes that these people's different attachment style mediated the effects that they got from this massage-like intervention. That's quite a finding.
Yeah, I think it's pretty huge.
Yeah.
And I like to see them pick apart and unpack some of the other questions the study raises too. It's um, uh,
Well, that's.
new
Do you have
frontier
any?
affective touch. Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add before we round it off?
Um, this was a lot of fun.
Oh, good.
And I would wonder if there's a way to like actually, I mean,
To actually what?
to get the scientists involved in this study to find out what they perceived from it and what they got from it. That would be really, I wonder if it's worth like trying to hunt down the email and be like,
That could be interesting. It would be fun to get them on a video or something like this. They're working in London. Okay, so there's no reason for. I was checking to see if they were in Germany. I forgot where they were, but they're in London.
last name, Crew? Cray.
Krahe is the first author. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm open. That's a good idea, and that's something I'd like to do sometime. I don't know any of these researchers specific. I mean, by know them, I mean I've never spoken or communicated with any of them. But I would like. That's a good idea. I would like to have researchers on an episode like this, and I think that would be a whole different thing than just talking with someone such as yourself about this. And my initial sort of mission for this is to talk with people who are part of practice as a way of increasing research literacy and comfort and familiarity in the profession. But I think also supplementing that occasionally with talking with a primary researcher could be a really cool thing to do. And yeah, it would be fun to ask these people some questions that we weren't able to answer from reading the paper. Well, Tania, I want to thank you for doing this, and I'm glad to hear you thought it was fun. I gotta tell you, at some points where I was working with this paper, I did not think it was that much fun. I might have cursed you once or twice or 10 times.
You wouldn't be the.
Yeah, no, and for anyone, I mean, you and I have been like arguing all week about the placebo mechanism. So I mean, that kind of thing's fun. But yeah, thanks, and stay warm there in New York City, and we'll talk again soon.
You too, man. This is great. Have a good one, Doc.
All right, have a good weekend. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.